Hi, everyone. Hopefully you're excited to learn about how to apply the fellowships, specifically national fellowships. We have a great set of panelists here with us today. And so we're super excited to have you. My name is Ava. I'm a fifth-year PhD candidate at the University of Washington, and I'll be hosting and talking through some of the basics of fellowships and the breakdown of our workshop. And this workshop will be primarily focused on US-based national fellowships, but we do have a moderator, ICE, who's at the tail end of this panel list, who can answer a lot of questions about international fellowships. And we'd like for you to do that on Slack if you can. So like Ross was saying, there's a Slack link in the chat. And so if you're not in the Slack, you can join the Slack and you can connect with ICE on more information on international fellowships. And the rest of the people on your screen will serve as moderators and panelists later in the presentation. And I'll let them introduce themselves now, starting with Ross.
Hi, everyone. My name is Ross. I'm a postdoctoral fellow at the University of British Columbia. In the Zanstra lab, we work on producing T cells from stem cells. In my former life as a PhD student at MIT, I worked with Ron Weiss and Domitilla De Vecchio on engineering feedback control systems inside of mammalian cells. I have a couple honorable mentions from the NSF GRFP, and I currently have a postdoctoral fellowship from Michael Smith Health Research BC, which is a sort of local BC postdoctoral fellowship.
Hello, everyone. I'm Yan. I'm currently a postdoctoral fellow in Richard Murray's group at Caltech. My research focuses on cell-free synthetic biology. And prior to my postdoctoral position, I did my PhD at Georgia Tech. And that was also the place I applied to the NSF GRFP and received honorable mention in the 2017 cycle. So very excited to share about my stories applying and some of the insights I have in the application process.
And Julietta, right before you introduce yourself, maybe you can have David introduce himself too.
Yeah. Hi, everyone. I'm Dev Garcia. I am a senior research scientist at the Army's Biochemistry Research Division and a visiting scholar here in the Murray Lab at Caltech, where I was previously a postdoctoral, National Research Council postdoctoral fellowship studying cell-free protein systems. I did my graduate work at the University of Tennessee and Oak Ridge National Laboratory, where I applied for the NSF GRFP twice, lost once out completely, and then won in the second cycle in 2016. So happy to share my insights on both of the extremes there.
I'm Julietta, and I'm one of the postdocs with EBRC in science policy. Before this, I did a lot of my graduate studies at Colorado State University in Colorado, with a focus more on sex differences in the brain, how that impacts neuropsychiatric disorders, but really excited to share some insight on how to write grants and all those fun things.
Hi, everyone. My name is Ice. I graduated from Curtis and Saturn Lab at U of Washington, similar to Ava. And I'm now at MIT through the Engineering Excellence Postdoc Fellowship. I'm now working with Jim Collins. I'm still doing the bacterial synthetic biology stuff. And I'm international. So if there is any international people on the call, the restriction for the fellowship application might be a little bit different. Please feel free to get in touch, and I'm happy to talk further on any opportunities out there. But anything that we are talking through this process will be applicable no matter what, because it's about fellowship application process in general. So please stay tuned.
Great, thanks everyone. Yeah, I guess I should also give my scientific background, but like I said, we worked together in the Carruthers and Zalatin labs at the University of Washington, where we studied CRISPR-Cas tools and also bacterial signaling tools and base editors and a lot of synthetic biology things just to make gene regulation more programmable in bacteria. And so that's more my scientific background. And with that, we can get into the agenda for today's workshop. So the current plan for the workshop is to first have an intro to national fellowships and specifically the components of the NSF GRFP. And then we'll move into the actual workshop portion of the workshop, and we'll be storyboarding our personal experiences first, then going into an example statement to highlight different application components, which is the intellectual merit and broader impacts components, and we'll talk more about what that means. And then we'll go into using our own personal experiences that we storyboarded to highlight the different application components to figure out how to actually put everything together. And then we'll go briefly into some scoring criteria and tips and tricks from a chemi or chemical engineering NSF GRFP reviewer. So this is someone who actively reviews applications for the NSF GRFP. And there's this really great Reddit post that we'll use to learn a little bit more about what it looks like behind the scenes. And then afterwards, we'll go into an awardee panel where we'll have an open question and answer panel with previous awardees, and then also a list of different additional resources for all of you. And so with that, let's kick it off with the NSF GRFP 101. So on your screen are a bunch of different fellowships commonly awarded to synthetic biology students. So as engineering biology students, we can apply to a lot of different national fellowships. And the one, again, that we're going to highlight today is the NSF GRFP, but there are also a lot of other fellowships that you should keep your eye on, especially if you are a US citizen. So a lot of these national fellowships require some form of US citizenship or permanent residency. And each one of them has different levels of funding and different levels of support. And there's a lot of different opportunities to apply across the year. And like we said before, this fellowship panel will be primarily focused on the NSF GRFP. And this is mostly because there's over 2,000 fellowships per cycle across all STEM disciplines. So you have good odds in actually getting one of these fellowships, and it's one of the better known fellowships. And so although we're focusing on this NSF GRFP, this workshop should help you write other types of applications, whether it's graduate school applications or other fellowships like Ice was saying before. And so beyond this list, there are also many other fellowships that are available, and then we'll have that list of resources at the end. And so just to really briefly talk about the NSF GRFP, it's associated with the National Science Foundation, which is the NSF portion of the name. And you standardly get funding for 3 years and also partial tuition coverage for your years in graduate school. And you can apply as many times as you want before you join graduate school, and then you can apply once when you're actually in graduate school. And so in the panel, you'll hear each one of us applied at different stages in our career or even multiple times within our career, and we're awarded at different times. And so this year, the NSF GRFP, I think the earliest deadline is October 16th. And something else, the reviewers are actually required this year to submit their letters of recommendation, or sorry, the letter of recommendation writers are supposed to submit their letters of recommendation before the deadline. So make sure that if you're actually writing an application this year, that your letter writers know what their actual deadline is, because this is very different than past years. The letters of record due before the your actual fellowship application is due. So make sure that your letter writers know that. And so, yeah, so that's basically some brief background on the NSF GRFP. I found out about this program really recently, which is called the EGFP, but there are certain institutions that are designated EPSCOR or established programs to stimulate competitive research. And these programs are created to help states that receive a relatively low amount of federal research funds basically build out their science and engineering capabilities. And so if you go to a school that isn't as well known for engineering biology or isn't an R1 program, if you receive an honorable mention on the NSF GRFP, you can apply to the secondary grant and actually get funding in a similar way to the NSF GRFP. And so this is a really cool opportunity, especially if you're at an institution that doesn't have a lot of funding for the sciences, for you to still have an opportunity to get your graduate education completely covered by a national foundation. And so I just want to put that on everyone's radar. And so keep that in the back of the mind. Even if you get the honorable mention, you can still win a pretty prestigious fellowship. Okay, so this is the basic structure of an NSF GRFP. And I really would emphasize looking at the solicitation for more specific details, especially the ineligible research section, especially like if you're writing a proposal that has a health-related application, like specifically health-related projects maybe under bioengineering or biochemistry, they have more specific examples of what is considered something that you can apply to the NSF for. And so as long as it's basically in this bucket of furthering fundamental research, you should be fine. But I think it's really important to read the solicitation just to make sure that the research that you're doing actually falls within the research that the NSF is interested in funding. And so beyond that, you need to write 2 essays. And so the first essay is a personal statement where you talk about your relevant background and your future goals. And the second statement is a graduate research statement. And I think in these 2 documents, you basically have 5 pages to sell yourself. And it's really important to give the reviewers a sense of who you are beyond your documents. So they'll have your resume, your CV, your transcript, and you need to fill in the space in between, basically, in these documents. And I think something that's important to remember is that the GRFP funds the person and not the project. And so it's really, really important to say throughout both documents why you're the right person to do the work that you're proposing. And so beyond that, within the NSF GRFP, they require discussion of intellectual merit and broader impacts. And so these are 2 separate components. And intellectual merit basically is potential to advance knowledge, so more the academic side. And broader impacts is the potential to benefit society, so more like what are your extracurriculars that you are doing to better support the field as a whole, beyond the academics and the deliverables. And for the NSF GRFP, they require discussion of both of these things, and we'll go through some examples of both intellectual merit and broader impacts during the workshop so that you have a better idea of what qualifies as which. And so that's one of the main things that you'll be doing in the workshop element of this presentation. And so in addition to these statements, you will also need at least 3. I think they always say 2, but it's suggested 3. And so I think we always really emphasize that you should try and get 3. And hopefully you've already started on some part of your statements and definitely asked for letters of recommendation already. And based on some discourse on LinkedIn and X, and just remember that these deadlines are early and a lot of these letter writers are like really shocked that it is. So make sure that your letter writers know their actual deadlines. And so beyond that, some general tips about the statements. Like I was saying before, the NSF GRFP funds the person, not the project. It's really important to write to a general science audience. You'll be applying in a specific topic, and within that topic, there might be a really wide array of different types of scientists and engineers. So you need to really make sure that your statements aren't so specific that someone who's tangential to your research cannot understand it. And it's really important to get a diverse set of letter writers. So you want letter writers that can talk about your academic achievements, but also maybe some of the other extracurricular activities that you've been doing to supplement your education. And the biggest thing that I always really push is ask for help. Have as many people as you possibly can from as many different disciplines review your materials. And I think the more eyes that you can get on your drafts and the faster you can get an initial draft done, the better off you are, because you really need to make sure that your content is very clear and easily understandable. And the best way to do that is have lots of people read your materials. I actually, I'll mention this when Heidi comes on later, but I cold emailed Heidi when I was an undergrad and made her read my GRFP, and she was so helpful during that time, and I'm really indebted for her to do that. And I think you can look at different graduate schools that you are planning on applying with, or even labs, and cold email or cold LinkedIn request people just to get more eyes on your documents. That's definitely something that I would recommend doing. It's okay if they say no, but I think you should try your best to get the most wide array of people to help you out. Cool. So now that we know a little bit more about the NSF GRFP and the fellowships that are available, we're going to talk a little bit about what you're going to do in the breakout sessions. And then go through the breakout sessions, and Ross will divvy us up into different rooms. And so the breakout session today will be focused on building your personal narrative. And so most of the winning proposals that I've read have a very cohesive narrative or theme. And this narrative should motivate both of your statements. And so before you even start building either of your statements, you need to figure out kind of what your narrative or your theme is going to be. What is the idea or set of ideas that is driving your story? And I put on a screen an example of one of these themes and how you would tie in aspects into each of your statements. And so, and apply them to both of your statements. And so this is an example of one of them for the research statement. So if your theme is I am driven by curiosity, you might talk about how you have a motivation to understand how things work. Research experiences focused on mechanistic understanding, like really dissecting things in layers. Or even how your extracurricular activities or skills building have been in building things from scratch, like maybe working with cars or whatever. And so I'm very clearly a biologist because I said whatever. Anyways, so in the personal statement, an example would be developing programs where you help others find your passions, or even finding ways to discuss your curiosity, inspire your local community and younger scientists to also build their own curiosity. And so this is an example of a cohesive narrative that can inform both statements. And this is the overall outline for the breakout. And so moderators that we have will walk through we'll walk through a couple of these different things. So what we're first going to do is storyboard our personal experiences. We're going to then have an example statement that your moderator will walk through with you. And then where you'll highlight intellectual merit and broader impacts. And then you're going to go back to your original personal experiences and highlight which ones are considered intellectual merit versus which ones are considered broader impact. And I think that will hopefully help you figure out how to label each type of experience within your statements. And so a quick explanation of storyboarding your experiences. So the first text will be basically this idea. And I really like this figure that I found from MIT education where there's very clear transitions on how each step goes into the next step. And so you have a timer, you want to make sure you don't burn yourself, you see the muffins, you're excited about the color, yada, yada, yada. But what we really want to hit home here is applications shouldn't be a written version of your resume. And so if you're familiar with storytelling and production, many areas use this concept of storyboarding, where writers will outline or brainstorm different pieces of the story and then fill in the transitions and explanations between each piece of the story. And so when I was writing my application, this was a concept that I knew of, and I found it so useful in building my application materials. And so what we'll be doing is simplifying this even further, and hopefully you have a piece of paper or your laptop and you can write out all of your pivotal undergraduate and graduate experiences. So your research, extracurricular activities, anything personal that really affected you, or anything else that you want to discuss during your application, and then associate different time periods with each of the experiences, and then try to fill in the explanation between each of your experiences. Like, this thing at time point A led me to this other thing at time point B. And some useful documents that you can pull up to help you brainstorm are your resume and CV, or even previous personal statements where you've talked about this. And again, the whole point of this is to fill in pieces of the application. What are reviewers missing about your story that you need to tell them through your statements? Okay, so that's the first part. And our moderators will help you go through this. And then all together in your breakout room, you will dissect a shortened example of an NSF GRFP statement and determine which sentences qualify as intellectual merit versus broader impacts. And so that you'll do all together, and then really quickly, and then hopefully you'll get to your own experiences and start highlighting what is intellectual merit and what is broader impacts in your own experiences. And so, yeah, again, moderators will walk through everything with you guys, and I can leave this up for the moderators if they'd like to look at it for a second. I'll leave it up also when we split up into breakout rooms, but if Ross is ready, I think we're all ready.
Okay, so we're gonna basically automatically send everyone to a breakout room. If you're comfortable, you're welcome to turn on your video, but there will probably be at least some interaction over voice. So we're gonna send everyone out, maybe say hi quickly, and then we can get into the storyboarding and other exercises. For the moderators, we're gonna have to kind of do this manually because it was too complicated to do us and them at the same time. Okay. So now I have to figure out how to get us in.
How is everyone doing? Since we left our room a little bit early, has anyone get their document like finally drafted? Like, anyone has like a full page of documents drafted?
I think some groups, it was like very mixed. Some groups had got through the document, other groups had not. Other groups couldn't pull up the document. And so I think if anyone wants a copy of like the answer key, I put my email in the chat for that reason. So if you need any additional information, you can just email me and I'll send it. I'll add you to the document with the corrected, like with the annotated key. But hopefully, I think everyone had really, really good discussions. I was super excited to bounce around and hear what everyone was chatting about. In the last couple breakout rooms that I popped into, there was one really good question that I wanted to highlight really quickly. I think it's really important with the broader impacts side of things to both have broader impacts for the specific area of research that you're pursuing, but also broader impacts for general public. So like an outreach activity or something that you can actually educate the general population with. So you can think of like broader impacts in both like who is your research serving, but also who can you serve with your research. Not to be too much of a mind.
Yeah, I see that Ross shared the document. I didn't know that Zoom can do that. Hopefully like everyone get a chance to check it out.
Hopefully I don't get pinged like a lot.
Zoom continuously improves. Okay, Ava, so you have some slides, right?
Yep, cool. So we're gonna get through this next section, which is called the reviewer perspective, where we'll talk a little bit more on what it looks like on the reviewer side of things. And so how do the reviewers actually score the NSF GRFP? I think it's very useful as an applicant to know what it looks like on the other side. There's this Reddit thread up here. I think if you look up comments from a GRFP reviewer, you'll be able to find it very easily. It's comments that were sourced from a chemical engineering reviewer, and he basically wrote out his perspective and how it works. So basically, applicants are split into 3 categories: undergrad, first-year graduate students, and second-year graduate students. And then numerical scores were assigned for IM, BI overall. So it's like, how good is their intellectual merit? How good is their broader impacts? And how good is the statement overall? So you get 2 sets of these per statement. So you get one IMBI overall for your research and one IMBI overall for your personal statement. And the way that they label you is poor, fair, good, very, and excellent. Very meaning very good. And then those are corresponded to numerical scores. And the way that the scores are then normalized is based on scores awarded to all the applicants by that reviewer. So like for example, if there's 2 reviewers where there's like reviewer A that almost everyone is scoring good to excellence, then you'll be normalized within that group versus reviewer B who is primarily scoring between poor and good. Some applications are getting very good, then you'll get a higher C score. And it's just a method then to normalize the reviewer scores so that it's normalized, because you're going to have reviewers that are like way more hard on you versus ones that are nicer. And so that's kind of how it works. And basically the top students with the highest scores are nominated for the award. And if you're on the cusp or like on the borderline with high variance across reviewers. Like if there's across your 3 reviewers, there's differences, then you get discussed by a panel within your topic. And yeah, so that's basically how the scoring works. This is an example of feedback given to the applicant. I wanted to show this because this is actually some feedback that I got on my NSF GRFP, but I thought it was really funny because they called my actual double major, which is like chemical engineering and microbiology, as a double major in quotations, and then also called me unfocused and in places confusing. But they gave me an excellent. So I think it's like very kind of all over the place with what kinds of feedbacks you got. My second reviewer, this is I think my first reviewer, but my second reviewer actually gave me 2 goods, and I still was awarded the NSF GRFP. And so I think like when you get your feedback back, you can't really take what these scores are at face value, because I think a lot of the times it really like changes based on the reviewers that you get. Some other tips and tricks from the Chemi reviewer. It's really important to remember that when they're reviewing, they were instructed to review applications holistically, which is very similar to graduate admissions. So both who you are as a student and outside of being a student, and same for research, so like who you are as a researcher and outside of research. In addition, he said that there was really limited concern for institution bias, where your research experience and productivity are actually things that are weighted more highly. So if you're worried that you're not coming from like a top school and you won't get the GRFP, they have that covered. Like for example, I went to Arizona State, which is a public school, still an R1, but a public school, but I still was awarded a GRFP, so were a lot of my peers at Arizona State. So in addition, broader impact activities were regarded more positively if the student appeared to be dedicated to them. So when you're talking about broader impacts and things that you've done in the past, it's important to talk about things that you were like consistent with and have shown progress towards. And so for me, I was volunteering with a lot of different organizations in undergrad, including engineering ambassadors. And I talked about my experiences throughout my undergraduate career. And it's important to use figures, highlight key sections and statements using different formatting. Heidi, who actually reviewed my statements and is actually on this call, was someone who really emphasized with me to include a figure. And I think even if it's really small and in the corner, it's really important to like show that you can generate some sort of figures to demonstrate your research. Okay, and then the last point, I think, is to strike a balance between clear motivation and also enough methodological detail to convince the reviewer why the research you're proposing is novel. So like I was saying before, you want both clear understanding, big picture of what it is that you want to achieve, but also enough detail on the smaller picture to show that you're actually knowledgeable in the area that you're talking about. And so it's like a very delicate balance, but I think as long as your friends or peers or mentors can understand that are in different areas, like what specifically you're doing, I think that's a good way to figure out whether you have a good balance. Cool. Okay, so that's our last really word heavy or slide heavy set of slides. Now we're gonna go straight into the panel. And again, if you need to hop off at any time, feel free to do so. But we have our lovely panel with us today, and you can ask us any questions. I feel like we've all introduced ourselves. I might stop sharing. Should I keep the screen up? Ross, what do you think?
You can keep it up for like
Yeah.
a few minutes at least.
Sure.
Just so everyone can be reminded of who we are. Yeah, I think we got introduced before, right? Was there anybody that wasn't introduced at the start?
Maybe Heidi.
I forget. Yeah, let's introduce Heidi then.
Yeah. Do you want
Heidi's
to give a
someone
quick
else.
introduction? Is she here still? She might not be.
Wait, she was here.
She might have popped off.
Okay, whatever. If she comes back, she comes back. So, okay, so we'll just open the floor to questions, and if everybody is really quiet, I will randomly choose questions from the form for people to put in questions. And you can also put them in the chat and we'll pay attention to those and try to answer there too, if you don't want to speak up. All right, Sephora, what's up?
Hi, I just wanted to ask from like the perspective of somebody who's moving into a new field who like studied one thing in undergrad but is studying a different thing in grad school. How do you like convey your like research experience and like classes you took in undergrad in like the intellectual merit section when like of your personal statement, kind of to show reviewers that you are going to grad school for like a good reason and know why you want to go there?
Yes, I can take this because I also hopped from chemistry to largely a chemical engineering background. I think a good way to put it is to put your experience in the context of what I think a lot of researchers are doing now, and that is that you have just a good understanding of multidisciplinary research. So bringing a new perspective to a field, I think, is a very clever way of stating that you have the ability to bring something fresh and frankly that you're not scared of doing research work that is complicated and difficult. And if you're able to show, especially in your research statement, that you have a good idea of how this project is going to work, and you've prepared yourself by pointing out the resources that you have available to you to make it work, is I think a good way to make people not ask questions about that. That is something I think that a lot of people skip out in their statements, not making it clear that they have done the legwork to show why it is that this project is going to be successful. In my statement, I made it very clear as to how I was going to use the computational resources at the national lab that I was at, despite not really being someone that had done a lot of computational work in the past.
Yeah, maybe I'll also jump in. I similarly jumped fields. I went from something that was like very standard microbiome to something that's more applied, like synthetic biology. So I was like studying the lung environment to like developing tools in synthetic biology. And so the thing that I really emphasize is kind of what David was saying, like what soft skills that I developed in my undergraduate career can now apply to my graduate career, and why specifically I'm the right person to do the work that I'm doing. I similarly took an institution that I actually didn't even apply to at graduate school and like use them as a model to write my application. So like I was like in so-and-so's lab at so-and-so university, I will use their resources of XYZ to do XYZ. And I think that was actually really powerful because I had figured out which resources were available to apply the work that I wanted to do next. So I think you can be very like smart, similar to what I think what like David did, to like do things that maybe you haven't done before, but know like where to actually do them. And I actually didn't even apply to that school, so you can kind of be very vague or not honest, maybe.
Can I ask a question? I was wondering how important or which way is more rewarded? Is it the feasibility of your project or more so the creativity of the project? Like, would it be better to lean on the side of something that's less feasible, but maybe a little more out there versus something that's a little more realistic, but maybe not as impactful?
Well, you might get different opinions here. So I think that the thing that I would say is if you can clearly describe something and like why it matters and like what you plan to do, and it's risky but exciting, like I think that's going to be totally fine. But the other risk is that if it's like really out there, it might make less sense to them or something like that, or like might be harder to describe because it might involve like, you know, more steps of explanation and so on. And so if you're going to like pitch something that's a little bit more like risky out there, you just have to like make sure you do the legwork to like very clearly explain like where you're going and why it makes sense and so on. And then I think, you know, they might say like, oh, this sounds risky, but like they're ambitious. And I think you saw in like Ava's review, right, that they said something like, you know, this is like an ambitious project, blah, blah, blah. And it's like more so the exercise of like seeing how you think and like seeing what you're interested in doing and like seeing that, you know, like what the impacts could be that matter. And like whether you choose one or project or the other, it probably has like some marginal effect. Maybe they would get excited about one. Maybe they would be like, oh, that's not going to work. And that might like slightly bias them. But the more like clear you can write the statement either way, then it's going to be like easier for them to digest and sort of at least give you like that sort of credit. And it might be kind of reviewer dependent in that way.
Yeah.
Oh, sorry, go for it.
Oh yeah, see, and I think that it's very important to like remember Ava's words in regards to how they fund these things. That they're funding you, they're not funding the project. And the reviewers aren't dumb. They know that there's a good chance you're not even going to do this project. It really is about you being able to, you know, create something solid. They at the end of it want. They're the NSF. They want research that's going to be published. So publishable work that is of intellectual value and merit. But they're not going to be experts in it. There's probably you don't want to do hand waving, but you don't need to prove that it's going to work before you've even done the research.
And just to like also like hinge on that, there is one of the review criteria in there. This has to be within the framework of the timeline of a PhD, because the NSF only supports you for 3 years. So I think what they're really going for is like, can this funding give you the leg up for you to establish an idea that's like a little out there, but would establish enough data to obtain sequential funding. So thinking on that realm, so I think it's okay for a project that's a little out there, but also leveraging like, I'm going to be at this institution, I can see potential collaborations with like this lab, that lab, this equipment to help push it forward. So even though it's a little out here right now, if I start a year later with this funding, I don't think like, I think I'll make enough progress to push an outlandish idea right now to a feasible one.
I think the important thing is to make it clear, kind of whatever, piggybacking off of what everyone's saying is, are there mechanisms in place? Have you described the mechanisms that you're going to have to get to the place that you want to get to achieve the goals that you're proposing? And are there the resources that you need available to get there? And that was one of the biggest things that I saw in some grants that I looked at, was this, if someone's proposing to do some crazy imaging technique, but they have no collaborations with any sort of imaging core, they don't know their microscope jargon and the proposal is not there, then that's a red flag that this person might not have the resources available to get to where they want to be. So highlighting that is extremely important.
That's great. Thank you.
Okay, question from Nathan.
I see some raised hand.
Yeah, they're just gonna call on yeah, I guess let's see, we'll go Nathan and then Sephora.
So I guess bouncing off of the, I guess, research proposal part, how much did you focus, or how much do you guys focus more on like the background and the why you want to achieve this project versus like the methodology of how you actually achieve it? Like how much did you allocate towards that on the research proposal part? I guess like methods of like how you're going to do it versus like the background of why. That makes sense.
Yeah, it's yeah. Then to me, I feel like it's more of a stylistic thing, right? Like it depends how you like to write. I mean, there's really no going wrong. If you honestly, you follow someone's template that has one before, it's as good as any. I don't think you have to think about that part. I don't think you have to think about that part too hard. The most important thing is just going to be whether or not you hit the points that you're supposed to. Making sure that you've made it clear what the intellectual merit of the project, what the broader impacts of the project are. That notwithstanding, a few extra lines here and there in any given section is not really going to make it or break it. I actually don't even remember how much methodology I put into mine. I think it was like a single paragraph as to how I was going to do it. And a lot of it was just explaining like why it was valuable and why it was worthwhile for me to spend the that chunk of my PhD doing that work.
Yeah,
I think you can, sorry, go ahead.
Oh, okay. So I think a common fallacy with methodology is like, oh, I'm gonna put in like all the technical terms and approach to do it. So I think for a broad reviewing panel for NSF, it may be good to like have your aims followed by like, why do I want to do it? So your rationale, and then 2-3 sentences on the approach you're going to do it, and then expected outcome, implication of this approach. So something like that.
Yeah, I think very similar to Yen. I like mixed it in, like as I went. Just mix it in so that they know that you know what you're talking about. Like for me, I had done no cloning before graduate school. And so I had to like learn how any cloning mechanisms worked and then put that in my application. And so I like talked through details with someone who knew the field that I was switching to and asked them if this is actually how the science works, and then included that in my application. And so I think it's very possible, even if you're switching fields, to like use your resources and your connections to get your application to where it needs to be.
Support?
Just related to like the research statement, how, like, I know the proposal is supposed to be original research, but can you like base your original research question on like a research question that you're working on right now, like at a lab or something that's like already, that you're already familiar with? Because I've kind of drafted my question off of work that's being done at the lab that I work at right now.
Yeah, in fact, I'd recommend it. They're not gonna check.
I agree, but I also think that originality matters. Like I think PIs are very quick to pick up on what is like your own ideas versus like something that your PI generated. Yeah, sorry, I also cut you.
No, please, that's totally true. I mean, it's yeah, there's a difference in just taking someone's idea and just like getting a project off of something that's related to the lab, right? I mean, that is the job of a PhD student, or like what should be the job of your PI, to like give you the tools to be able to generate your own questions within the context of that laboratory, and that's more or less what you're doing for this.
Well, like my opinion is that the award is making the decision on you, not the project. So if the research proposal is solid, but it reads disjoint from your personal statement, the reviewers are going to pick that up. And that's not what you want the reviewers to pick up. So I felt like the personal statement and the research proposal needs to just integrate seamlessly. It's like when they read the personal statement, they're like, I am reminded of the research proposal. And same thing when they read the research proposal, it's like, this is consistent with the person that I read from the personal statement.
Kind of going off of that similarly, you also want to make sure that your advisor, your primary reference writer, is on board and that what they're saying in their letter of recommendation is consistent with what you're saying in your personal statement and your research proposal. So having a really good open communication about what each of you is talking about and that they match is going to be really important.
Jumping off of that, I think it's important to send all of your materials to your letter review writers too. So like as you have drafts for things, send them to your letter review writer so that they can highlight the same things that you're highlighting in your statements.
Or tell them what you want them to highlight, because sometimes they'll do that.
Yeah, it can save you a little space. Okay, I think that Aline or Alina's hand was up first.
Thanks. Yeah, I guess I had a very similar question of just like I'm a graduate student applying, and I wasn't sure how much preliminary data I would need and like how important that is.
The
Yeah.
comments
Like
for a
our first
GRFP
year.
reviewer is like really, really good on this. Like you should read that for sure because they touch on this exactly. Specifically, I think if you're a second year, you should have some preliminary data. If you're a first year, I don't think that it's required. And again, sorry, Ross, for cutting you off.
Same thing.
I'm really bad at this.
Okay, Jacob.
The reference writers, you have to rank them. I was wondering, how do you choose who you should put as your reviewer one versus your or your reference writer one versus your reference writer two? Is it based on like how strong you think the letter will be, or like should my my current PI in graduate school be my first reference, and then undergraduate mentor too, or like should I spread out my research experience with my personal experience? Like how do I go about ranking these, and how important is that? Is that something that is going to be critical?
Well, the advice that I always got was to put them in the order of the people that know you best and have the best idea of quote unquote your potential. If you're a grad student, definitely PIs first, because that's just the person that's knows you best at the time and at the moments. And then from there, it's whoever has the most experience with you, and if you can get them to essentially customize their letters very specifically to you, whoever's going to say the most glowing things that are also related to your application. But other than that, I don't think it actually even matters all that much what order they're in. You're probably gonna be worse served by thinking about that too much compared to like making sure that you pick the right section to put in your application than anything. But yeah, those yeah, that's a relatively straightforward algorithm to pick them, I think.
Kind of going off of picking the sections that you're applying to. I wish I knew this early in applying for grants. Your program officer is one of the biggest decision makers on whether you get the money or not. And they are human beings and they're one of your biggest resources. I know a lot of people who actually emailed their entire application, or at least their part of it, to their program officer and got really, really good feedback and had emails back and forth. And that's what really established a relationship with their program officer. They got to know them as an applicant, and then they got the funding. And so it's not as talked about as much, but they are willing to put in the time to help you get the money because they want you to succeed. They're there for you in the end. They're not just a name in a study section report. But knowing what study section what section you're applying to will help you determine who your program officer is and who to try to contact about that.
Okay, are there any final questions?
Is the section that you mentioned, is that just the program, like you're applying to like biomedical engineering or chemical engineering like that? Or physics or something?
Yeah, I recall even within like the larger sections, but it's like the website, there are they're much more specific breakdowns of where you could submit your application. And the thing that I was warned about, especially as someone that was applying with a more of a biochemistry style project, was to be careful about putting it in, for instance, the chemical engineering section. Because they would not really know how to read my project necessarily. Even if my education was largely Chem E based, or if I put something that was largely looking at biocatalysis, they probably weren't really going to be able to understand it or judge it particularly carefully.
I also want to comment on this. I don't know if things changed in the 4 years that we applied, but I actually applied to the chemical engineering section with biology, and it was fine. And I think like as we move further in science, especially engineering biology becomes less of a nascent field, I think people in chemical engineering do have some sense of what engineering biology is, especially because a lot of engineering biology researchers are actually in chemical engineering departments. And so I think, I don't know whether it's just because we applied like 4 years apart, but I actually applied in Chem E and was awarded in Chem E with a bio application. So, and it might be even more different now that you guys are applying because you guys are in the 2025 cycle, which is crazy.
Yeah, I like shared a similar concern with Ava when I was selecting, because I was really like hoping for people's opinion for whether like applying in a bioengineering section versus the chemical engineering section. So I think when like reaching out to reference letter writers and also like reaching out for people's advice, right? Just include that question in there. It's like, do you think based on your assessment of how the review panel or the process looks like, should I apply in a chemical engineering, bioengineering, other engineering disciplines? Right, then that's specific to NSF. And if you're applying for like grants in NIH, then the NIH has like fellowship grants, and they have this like really great website called the NIH Matchmaker. So to find the optimal section, you just like put your abstract in the Matchmaker search and then just like match me to a section. So there are like tools out there for these type of program specific applications.
Very awesome. I think we'll end it there. A few minutes passed. So again, if you have any like additional questions, you can come join us on the Slack. We're happy to ask or answer more on there. I put a link into the chat, but I will.
I have like one other thing, which is like this slide, which I really want to talk about really quickly. That like fellowships are one path, but not the only path. And I think this is really important to highlight because some of the most prolific researchers that I know in graduate school actually don't have the NSF GRFP. And so you can still do amazing things in graduate school without them. And I don't think that you need it in order to be an amazing researcher. And I think that's really, really important while you're writing these documents. Like your life won't end if you don't get the GRFP. And then I just put the example of Caltech chemical engineering department where like not all of them have it. And I think that's really important. And then this is also just like a list of resources and a feedback form if you want to fill it out. I would really, really suggest looking at Alex Lang's website for additional content. And then also that comments from an NSF GRFP reviewer, it actually came out the year after I applied for the NSF GRFP, but I think it would be really helpful for all of you to look at just like how they actually score and the behind the scenes. Yeah, but yeah, thanks for joining us, everyone, whoever's left.
Yeah, thanks for joining. We have more events upcoming, so keep your eye out. If you joined our mailing list, there will be more things advertised about in the coming future. I think that the next one for people in the sort of soon to be in grad school range, if you are an undergrad or master's student right now, looking to do a PhD, is that we will have a workshop on grad school statement applications. And this is going to take place, I think, October 30th, if I remember right. Let me double check that. Yes. So if anybody is interested in that, for the 6 of you that are still here, I'll just drop in this information here and you can go check it out. This will be a little bit, yeah, more focused on like what you would write for applying to grad school, as opposed to like these fellowships, and would be after your fellowships are submitted. So it would be when you're starting to get into the grad application zone. So check it out, and we hope to see you there.
Thanks.
All right, and thanks to the panelists. Thanks, Ava, for hosting today, and we'll look forward to next time.
Great.